Hi, I'm Aegis Cores, and welcome to another episode of EU5. This is the nation of England. It is a three-part series that I'm creating into a full-length movie feature. The first part of the series, I overtook France in the 100 Years' War. Then I looked to take the fight towards the colonizers, Portugal, Spain, and the rest of Iberia, in order to block them from blobbing into the New World and allow England a clear path to colonization and creating a world global power. I've combined this all into one video for your entertainment. Hope you enjoy it, and reach out if you have any questions. Thanks everyone, and let's get into it. How to win the 100 Years' War. Obviously it starts at the beginning of this campaign, and I'm going through a lot of the mechanics there, opportunities where you can start to influence some of the vassals under France to switch over to your side through some of the mechanics. So I'll go through a little bit of that as I go through the campaign. Going through a little bit of like the estates, they do have some debuffs, so I removed like the Magna Carta and just added, because crown power is an issue for England at the start. So there's opportunities to fix that with that. Then there's a law that consolidates with the nobles, so that you can kind of revoke with the first parliament. So my suggestion is doing that as well, where you can for free switch that out without the big hit. As you can see here, the event, the Crown of France, usually spawns sometime in 1337. So that's where you can start the mechanics, right, to start influencing Brittany, some of the Dutch, Flemish miners. I guaranteed all of French subjects. They offered you that pack of caution, which I would not take, because then you can't influence their subjects to deflect. But as you can see, their Flanders is going. You start to see some of the others. You can get a bunch, but you're at an RNG where France is going to declare on you at some point, right? So you're just kind of rushing to see how many of these that you can influence before that declaration happens. My suggestion is to start over if you only get like one, because right here I get Artois and Flanders, which is a pretty good run. They both have forts, which will take France and their vassals a little bit of time to siege down. So they're pretty good to start. And then I start to get some of the other ones before France actually declares on me, right? I'm just going around to all of the other nations. The ones that have our leader as like as a dominion, so like Normandy is not gonna switch over to you ever, because they have the same leader or the same family dynasty, but the other vassals will, right? Like as you can see, Evero and Boulogne have deflected to me because they're vassals, and they're disloyal. Omale right there just timely gave me that deflection right before France ultimately declared. So everyone that you've influenced that's a vassal, you can separate peace out, which is actually a pretty good mechanic to kind of get larger nations out of the war. Normandy wouldn't do it as a dominion under France, but like Brittany as an example, if you siege down enough their provinces after 12 months, you can get them out of the war. So my suggestion is to consolidate all your troops into like London or the south of England right there. There is some troops that spawn in Jersey, not much, but every little bit helps in this war. But mainly I also don't want them to get killed and potentially lose some war score, because there's ticking battles that happen, and your vassals that are in mainland France, even though I enabled scooterage, they still join the war. So I wish that mechanic was fixed a little bit, because I don't actually want them in the war, but they join anyway. I'm guessing because it's a defensive war, but even in offensive wars, they join as well. So I guess it's a mechanic that probably needs a little bit of refinement, maybe as it pertains to the 100 Years' War mechanics. I try to send some troops over to Flanders just to influence them to attach to me and allow them to attach, but unfortunately the vassals kind of go off and do their own thing. So you try to find areas and pockets. Right there, there's a 3,000 stack. They run away. Not all of them get away in time. And was able to stack wipe a smaller stack, unsiege that down. Just trying to goat them into undesirable sieges that they have, right? When they send a smaller stack with a vassal, I could send overwhelming numbers, like 2 to 3 times, and only take about like under 100 losses to wipe out 5,000 men or 3,000 men or 2,000 men. So it's shepherding it over. I don't want to keep them over onto the mainland, and you're kind of against the clock because they will eventually all start to turn their backs on you as vassals, right? They'll all peace out of the war, which I don't know why my vassals do that, but when France is losing, they don't automatically move out of the war. So just something to be mindful of, right? As you can see right there, it was a 3,000 stack that's moving through my territory. Wasn't yet sieged down, so I was able to wipe them out, and then before the vassals could reinforce, I left because I didn't want to lose unnecessary manpower, especially in a war against my vassals. I was trying to reinforce my vassal, getting kind of beat up right there, but I wasn't able to get there in time. But I was able to bring them down. As you can see, Normandy and Brittany always sends troops over to Jersey, so it's easy pickings, right? It's 2,500. No longer a threat to you, right? So unsiege that down, move the troops back over to mainland England, in hopes that they resend troops over to siege that down again. With all those forts that they have here, as you see, there's a couple in Flanders and there's a couple in Artois. You can find those opportunities to stack wipe smaller stacks, right? And use your boats to get them out before they get killed by a much larger stack. And be mindful of Aquitaine. They have a fort down there that you can send down. In this instance, I didn't get there in time before they peace out. And it's just right as I'm kind of landing onto the shores, they turncoat right there, as you can see the pop-up. So I wasn't able to chase them down and kill them. I don't want to stretch myself too far into mainland France, so I get my boats back and then move back to England. So as you can see, the France is always kind of sending some of those smaller troops over to my land, so it's just wiping them down little by little. They have a couple there in Jersey as well. So keep kind of playing the long game, right? It's the war of attrition. Normandy sending over troops to Pale in Ireland there, so swipe them down, kill the French troops that are over there. So it's taking it slow, make sure that you're being mindful of where they're going, and finding areas of opportunities. Now that all my vassals are out, it's not as easy to kind of snipe them on the mainland, so you're just kind of waiting for them to shepherd over to Jersey and main England. And they've lost some of their boats, I think. My vassals have kind of killed them, unfortunately, so they haven't been kind of reluctant and willing to kind of move over now. So once you kind of see that, you might have an opportunity to get a little bit bullish, right? So here, because I influenced Brittany in the mechanics before the war was declared, if I siege down enough of their land and maybe hit their army, I can get them out of the war, maybe get some cash to help kind of fund this war, right? So I'm sieging things down. I'm trying to kind of split them out. I think you need about 3 provinces, maybe 4. So I sent it down to their capital. As you can see, I am taking a little bit of attrition there, but once I seize that first land, the attrition, the skull and crossbones will go away. So you get attrition for like that month. As you can see, Brittany's now reinforcing. Most of the other armies are still in like Flemish right now, so use that wisely, right? It's like, if they reinforce all together, that 13k stack's going to get completely stack wiped. But I am able to beat some of the vassals and some of these smaller stacks that are there, and siege things down. So once I get that last fort, that kind of go. As you can see, I'm beating Brittany and a couple of vassals again. I probably lost more troops than I solely intended with this war, but I am able to piece them out. I'm not taking land or anything like that because it's just going to get immediately sieged by the French vassals. So move them back over to mainland. I've worn down France a little bit, but there is still a lot of troops that are still in Normandy. Burgundy's willing to peace out for cash, but I didn't want to start to go into debt for this. I did notice that if I humiliate myself and then royal marriage them, they'll gladly peace out of the war. So with a little bit of hit prestige and the royal marriage, not a big deal. So a lot of times it's militarily, strategically, and then diplomatically, ways you can kind of get out of tricky situations. So now I'm starting to gather my troops together for a mainland attack. Just because the numbers, with those two leaving, the numbers are at parity now, and a lot of the troops are French vassals, which are much, much weaker than my troops. If they come after me, especially before the next age, the professional army spawns, my troops are a lot stronger than France and their vassals. So once it starts to get 1v1 in terms of numbers, you can be a little bit bullish. And I'm trying to find the right piece too. I want to scatter my selections around the country that can be adjacent to some of the vassals for year 2 so that they are willing to kind of deflect to me. It's really about a proximity to your directly owned provinces. So if you have a couple that are scattered and around some of those provinces, it could influence them to deflect towards you. So as you can see, I'm moving over towards the Bordeaux Sea region, kind of moving all the troops over towards Cornwall to quickly move them over as I start to siege it down from there. There's not as many forts, especially there on the coastline, and all of their troops are on the other side, right? There's about 30,000 troops that never really come over. I guess they were kind of afraid of the strength of my army. So I'm taking it slow, province by province. There is some French vassals over by Aquitaine that I influenced at the start. So if I siege down enough of their territory, they're willing to separate peace out, get out of the war. They have a fort there that I don't really feel like sieging down anyway. So, use a lot of that to your advantage right there. I was able to get to the shore there to wipe out one of the French's vassal armies that were being sent over there. As you can see, just kind of overpower them, making sure that as you siege down some of those forts over in the Anjou region there in France, making sure that you're reinforcing, making sure they're not going behind you, which will potentially give you some tough attrition, right? Just kind of keep a smaller stack as you wipe out the army that's kind of crossing past you, and then quickly get back towards the fort so that they don't see it as an opportunity to move troops down. So I'm using those other 14,000 troops in the south to kind of siege down some of the vassals and some of the French, capital provinces that allows them to, rack up a lot of the war score, right? I'm not looking to take a ton of land here and rack up a lot of unnecessary antagonism. I'm also trying to make sure that because then none of the French vassals will move over to you if you wrap up too much antagonism, So it's first phase is not all of nothing blitzing, racking up as much land as you possibly can. It's more about the strategy, whittling down the French armies and their vassals, sieging enough territory, giving war reps so that I can help kind of fund the next war, kind of breaks them economically. I took admin there for the tech, just it certainly is the best of the three, especially at the beginning with some of the proximity stuff, religious war CV. So there's a lot of advantages, especially as you start the colonial game, you'll want that tech as England if you're playing it for the long haul. As you can see, there's Armagnac was influenced at the beginning, so they're willing to piece out. The others, I don't think I did piece them out there. There's a few of them in the south there that I did. And then once you kind of piece them out, there leaves opportunities to use the spy network if you start to build it up to 30. And it can kind of influence them to deflect down the line. Once you and they are at peace, that's kind of the requirement. So it's not like they can deflect now, but after the war, because of the losses from France, they will be willing to, because they'll see me as the stronger nation. So it's kind of whittling them down, continue to siege them down some of those forts, moving across all of those provinces to get them as quickly as possible to get 100% war score. Anquetin also has cores that you can reconquest for them for little antagonism. But the problem is when you take all of those, they see it as like breaking their country. So you really need to kind of get it to 100% war score. So, but it does kind of break down France's economy, because now they don't have as much access to their north and their south lands. But the north is still where they have the bulk of their power. But it doesn't allow them to kind of gain full access to their country if they're kind of divided in half. And it makes going to war, a little bit easier next time, especially as I start to influence some of the vassals like Bourbon and Burgundy. It just allows me to have a stronger power block, right? So I'm going through looking at all of the provinces that are of interest for Anquetin right there. But it still takes a little bit more time to siege things down because, as you can see, it's much higher. There is a little bit of war score that you still need to do. So, finding opportunities, sieging some of those forts, which unfortunately in Age 1 troops, it just takes forever to siege things down with our stacks. But eventually you kind of get enough of the land. I don't want to get too close to that 30k stack to influence them to potentially, march on my armies. But I have, enough to kind of sustain if they do. So they kind of keep their troops there. I keep my troops there. I'm not looking to fight unnecessarily, but I take down all of the provinces around the country. I take down all of their cardinal seats as well, just to kind of weaken them. And then I start to take some of the bordering provinces that are around some of their vassals that I can potentially influence to shift. Take war reps, I take cash, just to kind of get it towards 100% war score, and building out the peace deal that makes the most sense based on all of the different playthroughs that I've had. So this helps kind of weaken them. It makes obviously my vassal much stronger with all of the lands throughout France. As you can see, Dijon got the professional armies, and then using the spy network to kind of agitate. Burgundy right there is a nice deflection. They are pretty substantial from a size perspective. Art of War right there, I always just take the 10% I know it gives it to my enemies. Another deflection there, another deflection. So once you're kind of in peacetime, you do get a number of these nations that move over to you. So now, unfortunately, France is in a war with Sicily. Right there, the Black Death kills my leader. And luckily, my heir is pretty strong. But as you can see, Armagnac now declares, following the conclusion of that war. So it's just trying to continue to improve opinions. I guarantee Britain, hoping that they would deflect, it doesn't work. And then you see the issue is not settled as the event that pops up, where it allows me to kind of go to war. So now I'm in the second phase of the war against France. They have rebuilt their army. They have a stronger army than I do at the start of the campaign. As you can see in that war that they had in Sicily, they had like 70,000 troops somehow. But after the Black Death, both of us lost a lot of manpower. So phase 2 is similar. because I was in an offensive war this time, some of the nations didn't join, namely like Artois and Flanders didn't join, but like Bourbon and I think Burgundy didn't join, but Bourbon did. So it was kind of random as to which nations did or didn't when I enabled Scooterage. You do have some small stacks of armies that spawn in France, so quickly try to get them out of there before they get completely annihilated by overwhelming numbers. Because I guaranteed Brittany, they joined on my side, but they really are just kind of cannon fodder. They don't have any forts or anything like that. I wasn't able to kind of save them. It was kind of timely when they kind of took them over. So there's a good fort that I took there, which is my land, so I won't have to worry about losing it in a deflection or when they turn on me, my vassals. And then the land immediately next to it is my vassals, so they can siege that down. But once they deflect, I'll have access to kind of move my troops in pretty quickly and then take that forward. So use that to your strategy if you're taking land in that first war. It's a good fort right there. It's around a lot of the other vassals that can kind of deflect towards you, and B, I use it to my advantage where I could snipe French and their vassal armies when they kind of sit on it from a siege perspective, because they don't see me as a threat because it's not on the coast. So they send some smaller stacks there as there's no armies of threatening. As you can kind of see, my vassals are starting to move out of the war that joined. So now it's kind of more of a 1v1 versus me, and then I think the vassals that I have in like Wales and Ireland. Brittany's, as you can see, is sieging things down, but they're a good soldier, but they aren't long for this war, unfortunately. So finding areas of opportunities, they have, because they spawned the professional armies in their vassal, they are going to get the institution quicker than me, so their armies are stronger than me. So if I send overwhelming numbers into to siege them down, they split up their forts. Fortunately, they reinforced it with the vassal, which makes this battle harder than it could have been. But as I slow things down, as you can see, I am able to take it, although my losses were pretty substantial. So I moved my troops back over, tried to rinse and repeat, find areas and pockets where I can utilize to my advantage. Luckily, the AI does kind of split their troops out, so it does leave areas of opportunity to swoop in, fight a divided force versus a united force. As you can see right there, a small French vassal stack that kind of comes in. I don't lose too many troops. I was going to send another one over, but I was able to beat it before that battle became problematic. As you can see, France is sieging down Brittany right now, which is good. It's kind of like the Saxony EU4 strategy where they're the ultimate distraction. Just kind of let them use their forts. You can see another small stack, wipe them out. I only lost like 69 troops or something there. So all positive, right? So starting to rack up battle war score. But because this is offensive, I have to eventually siege down Paris in order to get the ticking war score there. But the battles I'm kind of winning, especially once my vassals move out. The battles kind of reset a little bit. As you can see, there's a small army that you have to kind of chase down. They are a lot faster, especially the smaller armies, so sometimes that's the most annoying part when they send things over. As you can see, they have a divided force again, so I'm going to send all my troops over here. So I have almost double of the troops right now. So with that overwhelming numbers, you can see, and then they had a smaller stack that they sent over there that I wiped. And then I noticed that they were kind of just hanging around. They didn't go beyond my vassal's territory there. So they knew that they were stuck. They couldn't retreat any further. And I was able to get that big stat right there, 10,000 troops. So now it heads up 1v1, the two of us have a similar count of troops. And because I stack wipe them, France starts off almost like a coalition that joins antagonism. I think it was like the dev's way of like nerfing in this new patch that was beta and now is live as of this week. So once I kind of win this war, France then gets a coalition war with some of the nations over in like West Germany, Belgium region. I'm not sure who declares it on them, but they get in a huge coalition war, which helps kind of end this. So even though my vassals are moving out of this war, I wasn't able to completely stack wipe this army, but at least if I can kind of unsiege things down, beat some of these smaller stacks of armies, and then I noticed that the declaration of the coalition war, because now they have a lot weaker forces, it kind of declared on them. So really helps me kind of get out of this war, but it also kind of breaks France in the future. As you see, they're sitting on my fort. I have 2,000 troops more than them. With my levies, I have the standing army at the start, and then I also raised a mercenary, right, just to kind of support me to keep the numbers more in my favor. I unsieged down that one fort, knowing that they're going to be sitting on that fort for quite some time. I was like, let me just unsiege that thing down. I start to call in the Scooterage territories now, in hopes that they'd be in better support, but it's like they almost immediately turncoat me. So the mechanics seem kind of broken there, that like in 1 month, like they all kind of pieced out anyway. But as you can see now, those armies are coming into France from the coalition war. So now I know it's a race against the clock to siege down the territories that I want before this coalition does. So you can be a little bit more aggressive, start to split out your armies so that you siege things down before the coalition does, if you can get to it in time. France does still have about a 10k stack somewhere kind of wandering around, so you have to be a little bit cautious. But again, I want to get to the territories before the coalition does, so that I can get 100% war score and get all of the territories that I want. So it's just kind of a matter of sieging down Paris now. I'm sitting on the capital, which is the war goal. Sitting on the fort over there in Normandy, and just trying to find the right piece still that I want, knowing that they're starting to get dogpiled by the coalition, and then Aragon also declares on them. Seeing a weak nation, right? Like, how can I start to take more territory around the country so that I'm prepared to influence the remaining vassals that are willing to join, right? And then start to spider out from there, right? Like, how can I capture all of Paris, which really breaks France economically with sieging down their capital, and then they have to kind of move their capital, and then they're in the middle of this huge coalition war, so their economy kind of is wrecked from the second war. I could have taken the Union here and just made them a vassal, but I wasn't sure if they were going to get declared to be similar in EU4, where the vassal, then you're like joining that war, and because they were in a huge coalition war and then a huge war with Aragon, I was afraid that might be overwhelming numbers, even with like Castile as an ally. If I had to call them into two wars, they probably would have not joined. So siege things down. I'm getting towards that 100%. Can kind of take all of the land, take all of their cash, get enough of the land to break them economically, so that they're prepared to be kind of like a sitting duck for the third war. So unsiege, or unraise my levies. Unfortunately, I think at the beginning of the in the middle of the Black Death, I made Lincoln a city. I rushed that. I wasn't able to get the tech that happens in the scholarly treaties to make it more efficient. But then I built the roads, and then I forgot to build the governor, which just gives you a little bit more control on the northern England. But I guess no time like anything else to eventually get that governorship to get a little bit more control on my land. So don't do that. Try to do that sooner. And then as you can see that it's time for war. And then when you click that button, you immediately go to war with them. So I was in the middle of doing some of the mechanics, hoping to kind of influence some of the nations to shift over to me. But again, it was an easy pickings for this war. They were broken from the coalition in the Aragon War. As you can see, their land has been completely splintered across, right? All those green territories are lands that are no longer there. They've lost Brittany. They've lost land in the north. So it's just a matter of sieging everything down. I called in all of my nations, even the Scooterage nations, just because I knew that this was kind of a blitz. And it really was a fast war, right? They don't have a lot of forts, and their capital doesn't have a fort. So I was able to siege everything, or their new capital, because I took Paris and then made that a vassal. So I was able to kind of blitz down, take all of the territories. And then in 1369, I'm able to form the union with France, right? And the mechanics that go with personal unions in EU5. But you force that union, there's a bit of fixing that will need to happen, right? Where you reclaim some of the land that they had. But, you get that peace deal, March 1369. Certainly not a record, but it's an easy enough replication where you use the strategy. How do you win this war? How do you use the advantage that you have, right? Is that you're an island nation. So France has to come to you, make them a defensive war, don't attack them, and you can use your ships to your advantage. Let them land on your island and in Jersey, and then use your ships to kind of snipe them, whittle them down, and ultimately you'll win the 100 Years' War. As you can see, there's the event that pops up at the end. So England wins the 100 Years' War in a little bit over 30 years. So I guess history would look at this as the 30-year war versus the 100-year war. However, France still operates independently, so you have to move them through the different features in order to ultimately integrate them. However, it will be some time before you can even establish any sort of control. So you can utilize both countries on offensive wars once you kind of get into a position where France accepts assured offense from a Union standpoint. They always will share defensive call to arms. However, they still operate independently, so they can do their own separate peace deals. If you are overstretched in a war, they might just peace out, right? So if you go into war with Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, and it takes a lot longer than 5 years or so, they might ultimately peace out. So it's something to be mindful of. They're not like a true vassal or even a true union member as in EU4, where they basically were just a larger vassal, right? So it's something to be mindful of when you go, that they can leave some of those wars. So you still need to be able to handle your opponents independently in case that happens down the line. Or potentially peace out when you get to a situation where maybe you are overstretched. In this campaign, I want to go after the British Isles, right? Consolidate the British Isles region and potentially look towards Iberia as next areas of growth for England, right? Aragon, Castile, and Portugal are areas of opportunity. They are future competitors on the colonial standpoint. So utilizing the mechanics, utilizing both countries and power and might to really start to build the economy, right? You start to share economic benefits across the Union as well. So can I consolidate the French region? They lost some territories in a coalition war, namely some in their central region, and then in Brittany they lost them as a vassal. So we're going to look to rectify that and go to war immediately with Scotland, who's going to call in Brittany, and then I can make them a vassal, and then from Brittany I can start to feed back some of their old cores because they've been split up as well. So utilize those mechanics to to ultimately consolidate the French region and make everyone a little bit more powerful. So there are union mechanics that you can vote on, and they'll always vote for it because I'm the senior partner, so everything will ultimately get approved. From both military and economic, the vote on succession laws to ensure that we are always capturing the crown, that France is always electing the next ruler that's the same as my ruler as well, to ensure that England always owns both within the Union. And that could change down the line, but there are ways and mechanics to force them to switch their succession towards your heir. As I mentioned before, we want to go to a war immediately with Scotland, and they call in their ally Brittany, which is perfect because France can handle Brittany, I can handle Scotland, and then all of the vassals as well, right? I have a huge vassal swarm in both the British Isles and now also in all of France. And we just overrun both of them pretty easily, right? You just siege down a couple of the forts they have, enough of the territory. Scotland, I should say, is a lot larger than one war, so it will take a second war. They also have vassals of their own, so I want to make sure that I'm taking only Scottish territory, not their vassals' territory, because once you annex them completely, then their vassals then become your vassals. So it's a way to kind of make sure that you're not taking unnecessary antagonism, because that land will ultimately be yours. And then following this war, you're ultimately going to create vassals in the north, right? And they will help me then convert the territory or assimilate the territory to my culture. It'll take a little bit of time because you take that hit against opinion, right, when you're forcing them into English culture. But then they're able to use their cabinet members to assimilate the territory. They can deal with that a little bit easier than I can, just because I have multiple things that I'm trying to achieve from a cabinet perspective. In addition, I also have vassalized Brittany, who lost some land in the coalition war that France was involved in between my second and third war with France. And that, was an easy enough annex. I was able to vassalize the whole nation, and they still have some territories that I can feed back to them in a future war, which actually happens at the conclusion of this war with Scotland and Brittany. Because one of my vassals in Normandy ultimately revolts against me, and because the nation that was created out of Brittany joins that, right? They have provinces of interest, similar culture. They joined in. I was able to quickly annex that territory. It was a blink of an eye in terms of a war perspective. And I was able to feed that territory back to Brittany, who's now my vassal, improve their opinion on them. So they're going to be a strong vassal with the ability to help me into future campaigns as well. The Pale will drag you into a number of wars with the Irish states that are still independent, which is fine by me, right? Any territory you take in these wars ultimately gets fed back into the Pale, who's the lordship over Ireland. So I'm more than happy to feed those back into them. It's not a war that I ultimately have to declare down the line. So you're not using parliament or spy networks or whatever. So it's a free CB. There's still a number of nations. It's not territory that I'm terribly need to kind of rush in any particular way, right? They're not really joining any kind of coalitions. I'm still turning attention to Scotland to finish that war, right? Once I kind of siege down all of their territories, they don't really have anything from a territory perspective. They have some vast allies in this Irish area. They also had ally in France that I just kind of fed right directly towards France. And because France being my union member, I can feed them territory, and then the antagonism goes towards them. It doesn't go towards myself. And then, as I mentioned before, I want to make sure that I'm only taking the territory that's directly Scottish lands, not the Scottish vassal lands. So I got a couple of additional vassals over in Scotland. I had the opportunity with a royal marriage with Castile, and I misread the claim throne CB, but I declared on them. I thought it would kind of give me a union over both France and Castile, and I'd be overpowered. but that wasn't the case. I misread who it was for. I install like my cousin as the ruler, but there is opportunities down the line. It doesn't actually present itself in this campaign, but there is opportunities where then, relatives can kind of consolidate and you create those unions with the crowns. I also wanted to kind of expand into there, utilizing some of the new mechanics with naval governors, where you can kind of game the system. You can ultimately build like unlimited amount of naval governors, even though you only have a 2% cap. You can build governors throughout all of Iberia, as long as it's on the coast and they're a city. You can build an unlimited amount of governors using the feed towards vassals and then annex those vassals, and then it's just like rinse and repeat and continue to add more vassals surrounding the entire Iberia Peninsula. Create those cities if it's not there, or using the cities to create naval governors, and then chain all of the annexations one by one, and then you'll have naval governors in all throughout the Iberian Peninsula, which just gives a little bit more proximity, right? Each naval governor gives base of 80 proximity, which is the control that you'll get. And it just allows you to have more control over Iberia than you normally would, right? Without that, all of the territories would be 0 or like 15 after you built the city and a temple and Pound La Canal and bridge or whatever. So the naval governors is kind of a broken system. I'm guessing the devs are going to eventually nerf that, but at least in terms of the patch as it stands now, it's a system that you can kind of gain and really kind of utilize new territories. As long as you can't build a road towards your capital, you can build a governor. So understanding the mechanics of it is a great way to kind of break the system. So you have to kind of push towards naval value from a societal value perspective, which does take a little bit of time. It's not something that's done immediately. You slowly do it. You have to kind of remove a lot of your push towards lands on your estate privileges and laws, so you can get stuck. So it is things that you're learning on the fly as to like how you kind of push, because you need to get towards 50 naval and you start pushing towards land at the start of the campaign. So something to be mindful of. If you want to do it, it's probably worth having a cabinet member from the jump pushing towards naval so that you can get towards the naval governors earlier than I was able to in the 1400s. So with this war in Iberia, I have all three of them in a country. They were all allies, which is actually great for me. I have France in the war with me, all of the vassal swarms, and you're able to overrun them. And the goal that I have from this campaign was I was trying to get the claim to the throne. I put my cousin on the heir of the throne of Castile, and then release vassals in and around some of their major cities. Aragon has Valencia. I wasn't able to release Barcelona just because that being a little bit more expensive. But if I release Lisbon and Valencia from Aragon, I can start to build out the opportunities with vassals, the naval governors, and the land can't connect to Lisbon. So I keep Lisbon and Valencia for myself. I actually make this mistake with Aragon because you can't sell it to the country if they're immediately connected, because if they have the physical ability to build land with their direct territories towards that naval governor, it will be deleted. So I have to release a second vassal and kind of game it a little bit with the vassals on who owns the land directly adjacent to Valencia. So it's something that we'll cover a little bit further in detail. Either way, they have a number of cities, so that's the first phase of this war, was taking out each territory from each of them. And I take out Sevilla down in the south from Castile as well. So they have a number of territories, and now I'm breaking a lot of their power, especially a lot of their major trade regions, right? Each of those cities are major trade incomes for each of those countries. So it helps kind of break them down a little bit. And now we're back at war with them again because Sevilla revolted against my vassal. So right now it's just Castile versus myself. You can see Castile is still broken from the previous war. They only have 5,000 troops. I do think they call back in Aragon and Castile. So even though they're not in at the jump from the campaign, Castile becomes the war leader of the revolt. So they'll call them back in, which is fine. I can break truces so the next war is a little bit easier with each of them, isolate them a little bit more so that I can kind of steamroll them quicker. The goal of this campaign is, to take a little bit more land. Well, to finish the vassal that's revolting there in the south of Spain. And also continue to push, ultimately I want to take all of the coast so that I am able to then start to annex each of those territories once I have the naval governor. So, taking a lot of that southern coastline can kind of isolate them. It also will isolate Morocco from potentially invading as well, right? If I'm starting to continuously weaken Castile and Portugal and Aragon, then Morocco, with the help of Tunis, will start to get a little greedy as well. So it's something to be mindful. You might want to start south and then work your way up north. With France in my union, you can make sure that they're not declaring wars independently of yourself, so that they're not also jumping on. And those are really the only two threats to take lands out from under you, are France and Morocco, if you're looking to expand into Castile as England. But with me having the union over France, it's not an issue, right? So once you kind of take the capital, you can kind of get towards the peace deals that you want. You have more of that ticking war score. Everyone will look to ultimately get out of a lot of these wars, right? Now, Aragon and Portugal are not co-belligerent, so you have to be somewhat mindful. You don't want all of Europe to start to rebel against you. I am strong, but I'm not looking to just continuously fight coalition wars, especially because if you can see that red heart there, the broken red heart, I've started to force convert the culture in my Scottish territories. So that just kind of breaks their opinion of you, and then countries will ultimately come into a coalition against them. So if you wanted to fight a war, you'd have to fight your own vassal again, and it's like just kind of taking territory that you already have, so unnecessary antagonism. So sometimes you have to kind of wait for some of that to die down until they get a better of an opinion of you, making sure that you're paying full the diplo spend, and that just kind of increases the opinion, increases the amount of diplo capacity that you have, which you can kind of see is low here. But there are techs within the tree in both the first age and the second age that increases your capacity, increases your subject opinion. You're pushing more towards decentralization just because that's the meta in this particular patch, and you're just looking to create a vassal swarm in Iberia that'll just help you with future iterations of the war. I'm using levies right now, but eventually you'll be able to rely on either mercenaries, which is actually very powerful in this patch, or your standing army, which you can just build out a bunch of cannons and just siege things down as quickly as you possibly can. So the first rebellion against Great Britain, the second war against the Iberian nations, you're able to take some cash, get a little bit of an economy going, and let that kind of start rolling. And then from Castile, it's just kind of breaking them down a little bit. Start to connect some of your lands as well, as best you possibly can, right? As areas of opportunity. I'm taking a vassal. I'm taking Sevilla, the city itself, for myself, so that I can integrate that pretty quickly. And then, ultimately, it's all about creating that vassal swarm and utilizing the naval swarm down in Iberia. And as I mentioned before, you always want to pick the increased naval parliaments when you see them. They're not always there, but it helps kind of push along the naval societal values a little bit quicker, and you get a little bit of dev on your harboring towns as well, so that it is valuable in that standpoint. But it allows you to push an extra 2 towards naval each time, and it's a slow progress. I'm still not there. It has taken a little bit of time, but I built the naval in Lisbon, and built I was able to then shift it towards my vassal, and they were able to maintain that naval governorship because the land wasn't connected. So after I was able to do that, I went back to war. So we here are in the 1460s. And now I'm going to kind of speed things up within a series of wars, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty repetitive. They get a couple of vassals. Burgundy, who is not my vassal. There's two Burgundies. They have a vassal called Burgundy, and then there's another Burgundy that was previously Provence. So I'm not sure how they formed Burgundy. But there's two Burgundies. One's mine, one's not. So they're in the war as well. But it's straightforward again, right? We outnumber them substantially. France and myself each have 70, 80,000 levies that we can rise up against each of them. And now I'm not necessarily as worried about the vassals kind of rising up or using the countries against me, right? I've sped this up from a series of wars because it's all rinse and repeat, right? Here's the first war where I can kind of start to take territories from each of them. I'm now looking to take territory from all three countries in every single war and campaign so that I can whittle them down. I'm ultimately attacking Castile and then taking land from both Portugal and Aragon. And I'm ultimately going to siege both of them down before really they start their colonial empires, right? That's going to start to happen in the next 30 years or so. So it's kind of a race against the clock. I've isolated them along the coast first and foremost. So then they become a country that's like an island within Iberia, that they have no avenue of expansion. They don't have boat capabilities anymore. So they're not building those colonial empires. They've kind of lost all of the ability to expand beyond Iberia. And they also are no longer a threat from external forces because Portugal doesn't have access, or Morocco wouldn't have access to kind of invade and take territory that's not directly contained with them. So again, here's another war. Here we are in the 1479, another phase of the campaign. I think I declared this one in Aragon, actually. Portugal gets called in. Castile was on a peace treaty, so between the two of them, this was pretty easy. Aragon has a number of forts, which just takes a little bit of time, and it's annoying, especially if you're still using levy armies. Starting to research some of the tech for my standing armies, but I'm still relying on levies for the first 100 years or so. And then as I get into the 1500s, I'll have a substantial standing army that I can afford, along with all of the armories and stuff that you need from a tech perspective to build from a size perspective, right? I now have enough of the manpower where I'm using it. I still need the levies to support because they have a lot of troops, so I just want to make sure that they're not potentially getting wiped. Castile eventually got called into this war as well, so even if they're at a peace treaty, if it takes a little bit longer than it needs to, right? Then now I'm at the 5-year mark. Castile gets called in because of the forts that just took quite a bit of time to ultimately siege down. But again, just rinse and repeat. You kind of get the territory, you expand, and I'm isolating Barcelona now so that I have the ability to then create a naval governorship over there in the Catalan region. So it's just continuing to find those cities or isolate some of those larger towns that I can then push population towards to then build said cities, right? So that's kind of been my strategy of how to expand around Iberia and then transfer those naval governorships over to vassals and then build new naval governors in the next phase of the campaign in the war. So here we are in the 1790s, another war with both the countries. Portugal is almost completely done, right? They no longer have the coastline. They have a couple forts, but I can knuckle belligerent take their territory without the really worry about antagonism, right? There's a little bit of antagonism, but I'm able to kind of siege them, isolate them down, take all of their territory, or as much as I can from like a max war perspective. If they're not the main focus of the war, then you might not be able to take all of that land, but you will be able to take a number of provinces to whittle them down, and then use the next phase of the war to finish them off. Castile's still in this war. They have less forts, so I used one of the previous ones to break all of their forts in the south because they had like 12 forts down there, and it was just more worth it for the next phase of the war to make them break those forts, break them from an income perspective, so that the next phase of the war I just had to siege down the province in 30 days, and then I can ultimately annex them quicker. So again, Burgundy has been called into this war. You have the ability to feed land if you want into France, if you want to expand them further. I think I do that a little bit. I give them a couple of provinces and then make them get out of the war. So now Castile, I'm looking to do the same thing with them, right? Make sure that I'm taking the north of Spain, really kind of ride it along the coast towards Galicia, to make sure that they're then isolated and ultimately removed from potential or building a potential huge colonial empire, which make things a little bit more complex for the 100% war scores moving forward. Here we are in 1501, another war. Going back with them, I've finished the job, right? Complete annexation along Galicia. And how do you continue the momentum and building that vassal swarms? I'm not annexing any of the vassals in Iberia just yet. I'm mainly focused on annexing the rest of my Scottish vassals, as well as some of the vassals in Normandy and in like the Netherlands, Belgium region, because now with the proximity through naval and through docks, I can actually utilize that territory for power. So that's been my sole focus from an annexation perspective. And then once you have naval governors, like, you can game that system, but then you can't build additional governors. So you kind of have to chain all of those annexations simultaneously so that you have the multiple governorships around your own land. So I built all of them within the vassals, and then once I'm able to push enough land into all of the territories that I want so that I'm surrounding them with naval governors, then you start the process of annexing, which will happen in the 1500s now, right? Here we are in 1511, back at war with them. I started some of the colonial game as well. To be honest, I just kind of let that kind of run on its own at first, and they really were just discovering the African regions and settling a lot of their territories in West Africa, South Africa, and then they start to move up towards like Kilwa. So I had to actually start to force some of the exploration into the New World, which my automation wasn't doing from the jump. So just something to be mindful of. It seems like they prioritize shifting downward versus westward. So lesson learned. I maybe take more control of that myself. But again, I was doing a little bit of a speed run because it's in between wars. I wasn't really looking to expand beyond Iberia. I just wanted my strategy to dominate the Iberian region through the use of my vassals. Play kind of a chill game as well, right, where you're understanding a little bit from the colonial perspective. I'm not really a fan of the colonial features in this. You seem to get called into a lot of dumb wars that my colonial nations, and then I'm now like at war with countries that are, have to ship soldiers down, and it's just, it's not something that I was looking towards. So something to be mindful of. I do take some land over there in Brabant, knowing that because I have land adjacent there and there's harbors, I can build docks. So I can use that territory in the Netherlands, Dutch region. And now with Castile, I'm able to then kind of break them from a country perspective. I've created a natural barrier across their land, so now they can't connect, they can't exude any sort of control outside of their own ability with governors. So they're not able to like build roads through to connect their country anymore, and it really kind of breaks them down economically, right? That's usually the strategy I have, is isolate their country. With the governorship, they're able to get a little bit more power than they would have historically, where it would have just been all zeros because they'd have no control. But it, the ultimate objective is to relinquish the ability of them to control their entire region. It makes the next phases of the war easier, right? I can just march my troops into their remaining castles that they have, siege those down with my standing army. I'm at the phase of the campaign where I don't even need to raise my levies. It's not worth it with population loss that you'll get of it, so I can just use my standing army and my vassal swarms to siege everything down. I just immediately beeline to the castles now, and I'm able to siege things down pretty quickly with the number of cannons I have. I don't have a big standing army because I don't need to, right? Like, I'm overpowered with my vassal swarm. I don't need to waste money on an expensive standing army or merc stack. I really just need to siege down like 5 or 6 castles and then just sit on the war goal, feed some land to France to expand them a little bit stronger, and just finish the job, right? It's just all about, capturing all of the territory that they have, and ultimately giving them 100% war score, right? Aragon and Portugal are now completely gone. I just have vassals, English vassals in Iberia. I've started to do the annexation of the territories because I now have all of the governorships surrounding all of Iberia. So it's a unique strategy. It's a little bit gamey from a strategy perspective. As you can see here, I got called into a war, and here over in France has been in this rebellion war for a couple of decades now, and I had no way of joining to help them out, but it's really sitting on this final war goal with Castile. So I have a foothold now in the Americas, into the Caribbean, Western and Southern Africa, and continued expansion. Starting to colonize, or starting to send some colonial exploration into eastern Zimbabwe regions of Africa, in order to start to get the foothold into India, with the end game result of conquesting Australia, New Zealand, and all of the South Pacific and some of the other regions into northern Japan and whatnot. As you can see, I am the number 2 great power, well behind the Wu at the start here in 1595, but I'll close that gap. I'm starting to snowball my economy a little bit now, starting to integrate France into my nation. So I'll start to get my tax base up and build up some of the newer economies. I'll get the tech before they do, so I'll be able to snowball a little bit quicker than they will, and ultimately build a nation that stands the test of time, where the sun never sets on the Great British Empire. There's a couple of techs you want to be mindful of as you're starting out the campaign. The first one is malaria, that you won't be able to get towards the 5th age, the age of absolutism. But you want to rush for that as soon as possible, because especially if you're looking to invade into Africa and India, that could become a challenge with the armies, where you'll take a lot of attrition. So rushing for that will help. In the current age of discovery, I'm rushing for the exploration, which just gives you a CB opportunity to invade some of these colonial regions. It's not the best CB. I feel like it should have a little bit more buff, because the minus 30% war score in India is tough, because you can't really take a ton of their land as they have a high population. But you can use it in Parliament here. You can use it in nations here in Africa that are a little bit easier to invade. Their land isn't as valuable as it is in India. And these are straightforward wars, right? Kilwa and the other nations in Zimbabwe region are really not a match. I'm able to quickly just move in. They're a little bit quicker. The troops away, that's probably the hardest part of these wars, right? So taking it pretty quickly, sieging down the 2 forts that they have, and making sure they're not unsieging behind me. So if you take it slowly enough, make sure you're not taking any kind of unnecessary attrition. Make sure that their navies don't kind of catch you off guard too. Just because I have not built up a strong navy at the start, because I didn't really need it with all of my vassal swarms invading Iberia. So I'll begin to start to build that out as the Indian nations are going to have a lot more pose more of a threat from a naval game perspective. But here you can see, after you conquest, you can create a naval or colonial vassal that you can create in these nations and use that. And they're a little bit more loyal than traditional vassals, so you can feed them quite a bit of land. They'll actually declare on some of these nations down the line that you'll kind of get called into to clean up some of the Eastern African nations that doesn't require me to kind of allocate any resources. That they usually are able to kind of handle this their own. From here, I created another CB against the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and Ajuran. Easy enough war again. I think Somalia is a little bit more difficult just because they have a number of forts that are mountain, desert, so you take a lot of attrition here. But with my 2 standing armies that I have established now, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, it's just sieging it down, Ajuran getting them down enough so I can cypher piece them, grab all of the coastline, and at the end goal of this campaign is creating additional colonial vassal, control this territory, give me a little bit more of that diplomatic income, and continue my expansion into the colonial empire I tend to be. I don't intend to take this land for myself and have to deal with the annexation, integrations of it, and you're not going to get any value of the territory, especially now that I've already established that naval governor swarm in Iberia. I'd have to delete all of those or create a new vassal in Iberia and start that chain again, which is possible. I just didn't feel like doing it for this campaign. It was just going to go more into the traditional British colonial conquest of Africa. So at the conclusion of that campaign, I now have my first opportunity to invade India. I have my troops right there ready to invade. You see France is always going to join my wars as my Union member, but they're not going to be much help into this war as far as way they are. So I invade. I have 50,000 plus as a standing army now. You see, you take a lot of attrition. So I'm not moving my troops away from that fort until it's down, that they don't potentially catch me off guard. There's 2 nations in the war. Not too worried about it, but it's just, the attrition is really the hard part, right? You can see I've lost a lot of manpower here, but luckily with all of the armories I've built and integrated across Iberia, manpower is really not an issue for this run. I'm overpowered in that capacity. The really challenge is that the territories are quite expensive. You can't really take a lot of the Indian nation's territory. You're taking 2 or 3 at a time just because it's high population, high control, as we hear are in the 1630s already. But my nation is ahead in military tech, so I have that strategic advantage. I don't even send levies. I just have my standing armies now that will be here for the remainder of the game in India, right? It doesn't make sense to use that unnecessary attrition that's taken from shepherding them from England over here. So I do that. I win that war in India, back at war with Somalia, just to kind of finish it off, give me the full coastline there into the Horn, and basically just kind of play the colonial game here in West Africa. This will be the last war that I have in Africa. I mainly was doing it in peacetime, allowing that to kind of tick down. Move my troops over, invade the castles, and take all of the territory there. You can take a large amount in Somalian and Ajuran land, wipe them from the game, and now I have a colonial empire in the west of Africa. And then move my troops back to war with the Indian nations. Taking it slowly but surely, right? It's ultimately a slow push north into central India, so to speak. So they have a lot of forts, but as soon as you start to break them down, they'll actually start to delete some of these forts because they start to derail from an economic perspective. The only thing I have a threat is the stronger nations in the north invade them after me. So the ultimate goal is to start to isolate them from the remainder of India. See, I kind of grabbed all of the coastline. I created the British Raj, kind of as a nod to Hearts of Iron 4 and the British Raj with Britain. So kind of using that as the playthrough. You can rename them with whatever you like. You can see Ceylon's in here as well, so I intend to take all of that to make sure that nobody's really coming up from behind. It becomes more of a linear path to war as you go to go to war with all of these nations. You can see I'm still kind of expanding into the Americas. They pull you into wars routinely with some of the Native American nations. But again, you make sure that you're calling in your other colonial nations into those wars, and they quickly make mince of them. It's one thing I didn't notice is that the colonial nations won't automatically get called into these wars. You have to actually call them in with favors or a promise of land. So, I mean, I intend to give them anyway. Here you can see a rebellion, but sometimes rebellions open up the opportunity to take more land from India. So now I've taken all of Ceylon, or Ceylon, or however you say it. Back at war with Reddy, I think is the name of the nation here, that I go through a series of wars. And I speed this up pretty quickly. I'm going war after war with these nations. I've created a good foothold now for the British Raj. And between myself and them coming into these wars, they have a lot of manpower now to kind of raise from a levy perspective. And then my standing armies I'm using to kind of sit on the castles, allow them to kind of siege down some of the province capitals that'll just give you more territory. And then just kind of continue to push forward. I actually didn't annex all of Ceylon, finishing it off. I don't know why it's not a land bridge, so you have to kind of move ferries, which is annoying. I know in the EU4 you can kind of just walk across. So that's just something to be mindful of. And it's kind of like a peninsula, so you have to kind of sail around the entire island. You can't kind of sail through it, which I don't get. Why wouldn't you be able to sail through it if you can't move your troops over from a walk path perspective? But here you go again, back at war with India, moving in and trying to take on some of these larger nations, right? It's not difficult because you have the technological advantage. The difficult part is really just like the limit in terms of how much you can take from a max war score perspective, as well as just making sure that there's not an ally block that can come in that can kind of wipe, because some of these Indian nations could have 300,000-400,000 levies, and I only have right now about 50,000 standing army. I'm going to create additional levies now. As you can see, my economy is starting to snowball pretty well. I have like 60k in money that I've just not been paying attention to in terms of spending, but you make a lot of money as England, and you can easily start to support quite a large military hegemon. So use it to your advantage. Start to build those up and then move them over. As you can see here, 1662. After over a century, I have finally been able to annex France. It's been an annoying instance. I know that I was probably annexing Iberian and Irish nations at the same time, so it kind of delays things when you're doing some of these larger nations. But I finally got them. I finally have all of France and Iberia under my control. I still have a number of smaller vassals in both regions that I have to kind of clean up. But continuing the push towards wars with India, as you can see, you get through a lot of tech in the age of absolutism. So make sure that you're staying on top of upgrading the buildings. I've been recently watching the House of Guinness on Netflix, which just kind of inspired me to upgrade that beer workshop to the large-scale brewery in Dublin first. But upgrade every one of these buildings. It's kind of a free upgrade. Doesn't take a building slot. Might take a little bit of more manpower to like upgrade the facilities from some of these, but manpower is not an issue. You can see I'm almost at 50 million people in my country now between all of those nations. So certainly is not an issue with manpower, not an issue with getting these factories and kind of creating a snowballed economy. Back here, another series of wars as we move into the 1680s, another series of wars against India, just to kind of snipe more and more land, right? It just becomes a little bit more rinse and repeat. How do you make sure that you're staying on top of peacetime? Antagonism isn't much of an issue. There is a little bit of a coalition, but because of their culture, it's not too much. I've only been invading Catholic nations prior to this, and there's a lot of antagonism buffs that happen in Age of Absolutism. So you're not really worried about a coalition war coming against you, and I'm going to be able to overpower any of them anyway. So now I'm just trying to separate them from the remainder of the Indian vassals so that I'm not getting potential to have them come in and take that territory out from underneath me. I took Maldives there. So I've continued my expansion into some of these larger nations, cleaning up some of the borders. I don't intend to take all of the current day Indian territories, or even where they were at the start of like Hearts of Iron 4 in terms of the British Raj and Pakistan. I just really intend to take more of the southern footprint, where a lot of the valuable land is, a lot of like the valuable territories. The British Raj becomes pretty overpowered from a vassal perspective, who stays pretty loyal despite the sheer large size that you have. As you can see with these nations, you really can't take a lot of territory with the CBs, whether it's the exploration CB or the religious CB. I was rotating between the both of them to see if like one was just not working. The exploration just didn't seem to be. It actually just seemed I couldn't take as much territory, so I've been using the religious CB just because I took more territory with that than I could with the exploration CB. But the exploration CB allows you to get to territories that's not directly attached to your land or your vassal's land. So it does have its value and its place in a colonial game. And I could have used it to invade maybe more of the Malaysian nations, but I really wanted to kind of keep my focus on India and continue the exploration and the conquests or the colonial game in the South Pacific and in the Americas as well. So not showing that on offline, but I'll show you where we kind of net out at the end of the campaign on how we've established some of these larger empires. And so the colonial nations are calling me into wars simultaneously. But again, they are overpowered on anything that's there from like the New World perspective. As you can see, there's just limited spots of territories that are inside my British Raj colonial nation that I really just want to clean up, right? It's just more about making sure I don't have border gore, have clean borders, kind of push towards the mountainous regions in India, and create a clean break at the end of the 17th century as we're moving into the 18th century, and in the full thrones of the Age of Absolutism. So ending the campaign before we get towards more of the revolutions that happen, and creating an empire that stands the test of time, right? Here we are in war with India and then in war with Mexico that my colonial empire have. So I'm stretched kind of on both ends, although I'm not doing anything in the Americas. My colonial nation's doing all of the heavy lifting. And to be honest, the British Raj is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in these wars, right? I just kind of sit on a lot of the forts. Most of the battles, I just let them kind of take it, and then I'll kind of come in and support them from a battle if I siege down the fort in time. And there's kind of mid-max, get all of the territory that you can, isolate the territories as much as possible, because the less control that they have of the territory, the more you're able to actually take from a war score perspective. So as you start to separate these countries, it becomes a little bit easier to take more and more land grabs in the latter half of these campaigns, right? There's a lot of nations here in India. There's still a lot more. Punjabi is the main force. I don't actually go to war with them at all in this campaign. Luckily, there wasn't any kind of guarantees that are happening or alliances that would happen, which would kind of potentially give me a much larger war than I was looking for, with about 100,000 in standing army that I have now over here in India. But it's fun kind of playthrough here and building up and blobbing into the Indian nations. I just wish you can kind of take more land at a time, and I probably would have been able, for this video, to blob much further into the Indian subcontinent. But because it is a little bit more painful in terms of how long you have your truce time after 100% war score with co-belligerent nations into the war, it just becomes a little tedious taking too much territory, right? So wanted to get towards a stopping point here. As we moved into the 1715, just finished my final war with India. I'm at a war with Mexico right now, separate piecing all of the nations there just to blob as much as possible, and then feeding them into
the various number of colonial nations I've created here, right? I have Americas, I've created some Great Plains provinces, some West Coast provinces, colonial nations, just so that America didn't get too overpowered. I created a couple of vassals here into Mexico, British Mexico. I did like an Azteca and a Baja, just because you have to be adjacent to feed them territories, so sometimes you have to create additional colonial nations with some of these wars. So a little bit of border here would, clean these up in the coming centuries, but it's pretty turnkey, right? They kind of go about it with more on their own in terms of declaration. So I have not been really focused on any sort of expansion into Mexico. I've just kind of let my colonial nations do the declaration and then just kind of observe it, just to make sure that they're not losing it, potentially losing territories that I've already kind of conquest. But it's never really an issue, right? British Azteca. But it's pretty straightforward in terms of the conquests in the New World, right? They're just going to be overpowered, these nations. And ultimately, you're just kind of creating the vassals, or the new colonial vassals, or feeding land to vassals if they're kind of adjacent to it. Ultimately, creating a wide stretching empire for England. So that really takes us to the end of the campaign. We had a successful run at winning the 100 Years' War, defeating the colonizers in Iberia before they were able to colonize. It really gave us an opportunity to have free reign at the colonial. The only nations that really colonized besides me was there was a couple that colonized into Canada, like the Dutch nations. Naples actually started to, or Sicily, two Sicilies started to colonize into South America. Burgundy also becomes, or was Provence and becomes Burgundy. Colonize into like Argentina. But I really have a strong foothold into India, into Australia, colonize up into like uncolonized land in Japan and Siberia. Most of the South Pacific islands have now been colonized by me, and really had that huge control into Africa. And really the goal of the campaign was win that 100 Years' War, and then how I can create this global, strong, stretching empire. And you can see I've created these colonies in all throughout the Philippines. As you move into Russia there, and all of the Americas are now under my control, with exception of a handful of these territories. And I can easily go to war with those nations in Europe that own that land, now that I've had, most of India into my control. But we're gonna call the series from here. I think it was, ultimately we became the number one great power in that last war, and then we lost it. But we're kind of always moving on between 1 and 2 on Wu, right? We've closed the gap from an economy perspective. We're the number 2 great power still, but we're the naval hegemon, the military hegemon. The opportunity to invade places like Egypt and some of the more historical nations that Britain owned, moving into World War II and post-World War I in terms of conquests of the Ottoman Empire, are opportunities, right? But the ultimate goal, we got that Union Jack on the diplomacy, and you can see we'll eventually take over the diplomatic hegemon there, as we're the number one. It just takes a couple years before you become that, and really become the number one slot over Wu, who has gone through a number of civil wars the last 2 decades or so. Have pretty good control over all of the British, French, and Iberian lands with my naval governor hack. So it's still valuable land. I have 4 governors all throughout England, and they were able to kind of create a good snowballed economy. And you can see we have so many vassals that we've created from a colony perspective. with the great power of the British Empire. So hope everyone liked it. Please like and subscribe and follow along. I'll be releasing the full-length video over the weekend that just combines 1 through 3. So hope everyone enjoyed the video. Thanks, everyone.